The funeral flowers were still fresh when my stepmother slapped me hard enough to draw blood. The family looked away. They believed she controlled everything now. They thought I was just the grieving granddaughter with nothing left. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was what Grandma had hidden for me, right under the floorboards of my childhood bed. My name is Charlie Monroe. I am 28 years old, and I was watching my life end in a room that smelled like dying flowers. The living room was thick with the scent of lilies just beginning to turn brown at the edges, mixed with the sweet, heavy smoke of incense that had burned down to ash hours ago. It was quiet now. Too quiet. The last of the relatives were shuffling out, their shoes whispering on the oriental rug Grandma Margaret loved. They offered me limp hugs and awkward pats on the shoulder, their eyes sliding past me to the woman who now stood at the center of the room. My stepmother, Vanessa. I was still in my black dress, the fabric stiff and unfamiliar. My eyes were swollen shut from 2 days of crying, but my mind had never felt more awake. It was a strange, cold clarity, like being plunged into ice water. I watched everything as if from a great distance. I watched Vanessa Monroe, a woman of about 45, impeccable even in grief. Her black sheath dress probably cost more than my first car. Her eyes were red, but it wasn't the blurry redness of sorrow. It was the sharp, dry redness of someone who had been up all night, not weeping, but calculating. She was already at my grandmother's mahogany desk, a place she never dared touch when Margaret was alive. She was sorting the white condolence envelopes into neat stacks and gathering the various household keys into a small, silver bowl. She moved with a new, proprietary air. The queen was dead. The regent was seizing the throne. "Such a terrible loss, Charlie," my great-aunt Mildred murmured, her hand cool and papery on my arm, but her gaze was fixed on Vanessa. Thank goodness Margaret had her to rely on. I just nodded. I could feel the consensus in the room, heavy and suffocating. They saw Vanessa, the long-suffering daughter-in-law, as the rightful heir. I was just Charlie, the granddaughter, the nurse who worked nights and lived here. Yes, but more of a long-term guest, an accessory to the main household. I was the working adult, now temporarily homeless. The heavy oak door opened, and Mr. Harrington, the family lawyer, stepped inside, his briefcase looking grim. He was an old-school gentleman, smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and leather. He cleared his throat, and the remaining whispers died. "Vanessa, Charlie," he said, nodding to us both, though his gaze lingered on me with something like pity. "My deepest condolences. Margaret was a remarkable woman." Vanessa glided over, all performance and tragic grace. "Thank you for coming. Howard, it's all been such a shock." "Indeed," he said, avoiding her attempt to take his arm. "I'm just here to inform you that Margaret was very specific. She requested a simple reading of her will to take place this evening. Here, just the immediate family. She prepared everything well in advance." Vanessa's mask of sorrow tightened for just a fraction of a second. Of course, whatever Margaret wished. But I saw it. I saw the flash of pure, unadulterated ambition in her eyes before she veiled it again. As Mr. Harrington turned to leave, I heard her whisper to my father's cousin, "It's what she would have wanted. After all the years I spent taking care of her, it's finally time to rest. Finally time to receive what you're owed." She meant, I felt a wave of dizziness. I was completely invisible. I was sure Grandma had left me her grandmother's locket, maybe her collection of novels, sentimental things. Vanessa had spent the last 5 years drilling it into my head, and my father's. That money was adult business. My 28 years of life, my nursing degree, my full-time job at the clinic, none of it qualified me as an adult in Vanessa's eyes. The atmosphere in the house shifted, curdling from grief to quiet speculation. My distant Aunt Clara, the one who only ever showed up for funerals and weddings, sidled up to Vanessa, her voice loud enough for me to hear. "Well, I'm sure Margaret left everything to you. Vanessa, darling, her most devoted daughter-in-law, you certainly earned it." She didn't even look at me. It was as if I had already been packed up and shipped out. I wasn't just grieving, I was being erased. I couldn't breathe that incense anymore. I escaped to the kitchen, needing a glass of water, needing a moment where someone wasn't evaluating the monetary value of my grandmother's death. The kitchen was always my sanctuary, the place she and I had baked cookies and talked for hours. And that's where I saw it, in the metal trash bin by the door, sitting on a pile of wilted flower stems and damp paper towels, was Grandma's favorite teacup. It was delicate porcelain, painted with tiny blue forget-me-nots. Her mother had brought it over from Ireland. Vanessa walked in, holding another stack of envelopes. She saw me staring at the bin. "What?" she snapped, the polite facade gone now that we were alone. "Why is this in the trash?" My voice was shaking, not with sadness, but with a sudden, cold rage. Vanessa sighed, a put-upon sound, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Because it's old. Charlie, it's probably chipped. We have to start clearing out this clutter." She kept everything. It's suffocating. It wasn't clutter. It was hers. "And now it's mine to deal with," she said, her voice dropping. She tossed the envelopes onto the counter and turned to face me. "Let's get something straight. You and I, from the moment she stopped breathing, there is no place for you in this house anymore." The words hit me harder than a physical blow. "What are you talking about? This is my home." "This was your grandmother's home," Vanessa corrected, stepping closer. "You were living here as a guest, helping her out. Well, she doesn't need your help anymore. I'm being generous giving you a week. I want you to pack your things and be out by next Saturday." A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbled in my throat. "A week? Vanessa, I work, I live here, and I did more than help out. While you were at your luncheons, I was the one running home between my 12-hour shifts at the clinic to make sure she'd eaten, to check her vitals, to change her linens." That was the wrong thing to say. The air cracked. Her hand moved so fast I didn't even see it. The slap was loud, echoing in the tiled kitchen. My head snapped to the side, and the force of it sent me stumbling back against the pantry door. My lips split against my tooth, and I tasted the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The house went utterly silent. The few relatives still lingering in the hall had heard it. I could see them in my peripheral vision, frozen, watching. Vanessa didn't flinch. She leaned in, her face a mask of contempt, her voice a low hiss. "You ungrateful little parasite. You lived off her for years. You think those little errands you ran compare to the sacrifice I made? I managed her life. Now I'm managing her estate, and you are done." I looked past her, into the hallway, desperate. My father's cousin, Aunt Clara. They all looked down. They shuffled their feet. Someone, I think it was Aunt Clara, muttered, "Charlie, don't upset your mother. She's just been through a terrible ordeal." My mother. She wasn't my mother. They were letting this happen. They were endorsing it. I swallowed the blood and the tears, the combination burning my throat. My cheek was on fire. I said nothing. I just pushed past her, ignoring her smug, victorious look, and walked up the stairs. Something inside me, the soft part that still believed in family and fairness, had just broken. It snapped clean in two. I locked the door to my old bedroom, the room I'd slept in since I was 12. The floral wallpaper was faded, the white furniture chipped. It was all hers, all Grandma's. I sank onto the floor, my back against the door, and finally let the sobs come, silent and agonizing. My hand came up to my mouth, and my fingers came away red. "She wouldn't have let this happen," I whispered to the empty room, to the indent on the pillow where her head used to rest when she'd come to read to me. "Grandma, why did you leave me? Why did you leave me alone with her?" I was exhausted, my grief and anger a toxic, heavy sludge. I leaned my head back, pressing it against the wooden bed frame, desperate for any comfort, any connection to the woman who had been my only protector. My shoulder blade knocked against the frame and then slipped. I froze. My body had hit something, a piece of the carved wooden baseboard of the bed, but it hadn't just hit it, it had pushed it. I turned, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs with a new, strange rhythm. I ran my fingers along the bottom of the old, heavy maple bed. Most of it was solid, but right where my back had been, my fingers found a seam, a single piece of the decorative molding, right above the floor. It was loose. I'd slept in this bed for 16 years. I'd cleaned under it. I'd hidden diaries and old photos beneath it. I had never, not once, noticed this. With trembling hands, I pulled. The small, foot-long section of molding didn't budge. I pushed it sideways. It clicked. A small, dark gap opened up. It wasn't just the molding. A single floorboard directly beneath it was loose, too. I dug my nails into the crack and pulled. The board, old and smooth, lifted up, revealing a small, dark, hollow space beneath. And inside, sitting on the dusty subfloor, was a box. The floorboard felt cool and smooth under my palms, a piece of solid reality pulling me back. The smell of stale incense and dying flowers faded, replaced by something else, cinnamon and old books, and the faint, powdery scent of my grandmother's hand lotion. This house hadn't always been a battlefield. Before Vanessa, it was a fortress. I was 10 years old when my mother died. The car accident was a fast, brutal thing that ripped a hole in the world. My father, Eric, just collapsed. He was a man built of soft wood, easily splintered. I was left adrift in a house that suddenly felt too big, haunted by nightmares of twisting metal and shattering glass. I would wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, and the only person who could pull me back was Margaret. She would shuffle into my room, her flannel robe smelling like toast, and she wouldn't just hug me. She would sit on the edge of my bed and methodically list every solid object in the room. See the dresser? Charlie? Solid oak? See the moon outside your window? Right where it's always been. You are here. You are safe. She was my anchor. She was the only one who didn't look at me with that terrified, pitying gaze. Back then, this house was her. The kitchen was a permanent cloud of baking spices, her domain. She was always rolling out dough or snapping green beans, humming along to an old radio station that only played music from the 40s. The living room wasn't the sterile, silent showroom Vanessa had turned it into. It was dominated by Margaret's enormous, overstuffed floral armchair, the one with the springs so worn you sank down into it like a hug. My homework was done at a small, scarred wooden desk tucked into an alcove by the stairs, a space she'd carved out just for me, close enough that I could ask her how to spell photosynthesis while she cooked. It was just us three, me, Grandma, and my father, and it was lopsided. Eric was a gentleman, quick with a sad smile, but terrified of responsibility. He drifted from job to job, a short stint in construction sales, a failed attempt at managing a hardware store, a long stretch of consulting that seemed to involve a lot of staring at the classifieds. Margaret managed the house, the bills, and, essentially, me. My father just inhabited the space, a ghost in his own life. I was 12 when he brought Vanessa home. She arrived on a Tuesday, wearing a bright yellow dress, all sunshine and teeth. "Eric has told me so much about you," she'd said, crouching down to my level. "You're Charlie. You're the smart one, aren't you?" I'd nodded, wary. "She's going to help us get steady again. Charlie," my father said, his voice bright with a forced, fragile hope. "Vanessa is wonderful with finances. She's going to help us. Stabilize." For the first 6 months, she was perfect. She was a whirlwind of competence. She reorganized the pantry. She helped my father rewrite his resume. She praised my grades and told me my frizzy hair was artistic. She charmed my father so completely, he looked at her like she was the answer to a prayer he'd forgotten how to say. But she never charmed Margaret. My grandmother was polite. She offered Vanessa coffee. She complimented her cooking, but I saw her watching. I saw the way Margaret's eyes narrowed when Vanessa laughed too loudly at one of my father's weak jokes, or when she'd helpfully intercept the mail before Margaret could. One afternoon, I was complaining that Vanessa kept rearranging my desk. "She's just trying to help, honey," Margaret said, not looking up from her darning. A few moments passed. "Charlie," she said, her voice quiet, "you listen to me. This is your home. You are not a guest here. Don't you ever let anyone make you feel like a burden." I didn't understand why she'd say it. I wasn't a burden. I was family. Then my father lost the hardware store job. The panic was immediate and thick. My father retreated to the garage, sanding the same piece of wood for days, and Vanessa's performance began to crack. The tension wasn't loud. It was never a raised voice or a slammed door. It was subtle. It was the way she'd sigh at the dinner table, pushing a single green bean around her plate, and say, "Well, the mortgage payment is going up again. I just don't know how we're going to manage. Eric, not with everything." Everything always seemed to hang in the air, aimed right at me. She started helping with the grocery list. "Do we really need the brand name cereal? Charlie? The bagged kind is half the price. We all have to make sacrifices." One evening, I overheard her on the phone with one of her new friends, her voice carrying from the porch. "It's just so much, you know? Taking on a man and his child. It's not like she's even mine, but you do what you have to do for family, I suppose." I went to my room and closed the door. My stomach twisting, I started to feel like a line item on a budget sheet, a debit, a problem to be managed. Grandma fought back in her own way. She saw what was happening. When Vanessa was out, Margaret would press a $5 bill into my hand. "For you," she'd whisper. "Not for the house. For you. Go buy that ridiculous magazine you and your friends like." She was the one who first mentioned nursing. I was 15, floundering, feeling useless. "You have good hands, Charlie," she said, watching me bandage a cut on my own knee. "You're steady. You have healing hands. That's a gift. You should think about that. Think about helping people." It was the first time in years someone had told me I was a gift, not a cost. A seed was planted. The real friction started over the house. Vanessa, now firmly installed, began her campaign of updates. "Margaret, this kitchen is so dated," she'd say, tapping a manicured nail on the yellow Formica countertop. "If we knocked out this wall, put in granite, it would add so much value." "I like my kitchen," Margaret said simply. "And the furniture in the living room, that old chair," she'd sigh, gesturing at Margaret's beloved armchair. "It's an antique, but not in a good way. We could sell it, maybe get a few $100s, and put that toward the new flooring." "That was my husband's chair," Margaret said, her voice quiet but edged with steel. "It stays." Vanessa would back off, smiling, all sweetness. "Of course, dear. Just a suggestion. I'm only thinking of the future, of this family's assets." But she was testing the boundaries, seeing how much control she could take, and Margaret, in her quiet, immovable way, was holding the line. The memory that rushed back at me now, the one that made my breath catch, happened right here, in this room. I was 16. Vanessa and my father were having another budget meeting downstairs, which meant Vanessa was talking and my father was nodding. I could hear her voice, sharp and stressed, floating up the stairs, the words college and impossible stinging the air. I was lying on this bed, crying silently, feeling the walls of my life closing in. Grandma came in. She didn't say anything about the argument downstairs. She just sat on the edge of the mattress and looked around the room, at my posters, my overflowing bookshelf, my cluttered desk. Then she did something strange. She leaned over and tapped the solid wood frame of the bed. "This is a good bed," she said. "Solid maple, built to last." She looked me right in the eye. "Charlie, I want you to listen to me. The world is full of people who will try to make you feel small. They will try to make you feel like you're in the way. They will try to take what's yours and tell you it was for your own good." She pointed a finger at the floor. "When you feel like the adults in this house are not on your side anymore, when you feel like you don't have a corner of your own, you remember this room. This room is still yours. It is yours until the day I say otherwise." I just nodded, wiping my nose. Okay, Grandma. I thought she was just being poetic, trying to comfort me, telling me I'd always have a place here. I mean it, she said, her voice fierce. You remember my words. That promise echoed in my head 2 years later. When I was 18, I had been accepted to the state university, but the tuition was staggering. Vanessa had made it clear that student loans would be entirely on me, and that they couldn't afford to keep supporting me if I wasn't contributing. So I made a choice. I enrolled in the nursing program at the local community college. It was affordable. I could work part-time as a cashier to pay for my books, and I could stay here, in this room, and help Margaret, whose arthritis was getting worse. A nurse? Vanessa had scoffed when I told her. She was stirring pasta, her back to me. All that work for that? It's a lowly job, isn't it? Changing bedpans? I thought you were the smart one. It's a wonderful job, Margaret said, walking into the kitchen, her voice sharp. It is an honorable job. It is a job that matters, and she will be the best. She turned to me, ignoring Vanessa completely, and her eyes were shining. I am so proud of you, Charlie. She was my biggest supporter. She was my only supporter. The memory faded, snapping back to the present, to my hand on the loose floorboard. But one last image surfaced, sharp and clear. It was just a few years ago. I was home from a long shift, exhausted. We were changing the sheets on my bed, a task that was getting harder for her. We pulled the fitted sheet taut, and she leaned against the bed frame to catch her breath. Her hand rested on the exact spot, the exact piece of carved molding I had just pushed aside. She'd paused, her fingers tracing the seam. A seam I had never seen. A strange, knowing look passed over her face. It was so fast. Just a flicker. A combination of secrecy and sadness, and something that looked almost like satisfaction. Then she'd straightened up. There, she'd said, smoothing the comforter. All done. I hadn't thought anything of it. I'd just seen my grandmother, tired from making a bed. I hadn't seen the architect, checking her work. Graduation from nursing school wasn't a celebration, it was a trade-off. I passed my boards, got my PIN, and immediately signed on for the night shift at Lighthouse Springs Care Center. Nights paid more, a solid 15% differential, and I needed every penny. My life settled into a grueling, upside-down rhythm. I'd work from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., sleep from 9 a.m. until 4 p.m., wake up with the sun already low, and drive back into the darkness. It was a life lived in fluorescent light and the quiet hum of hospital machinery. But every other Friday, I'd sign over the bulk of my paycheck. I'd transfer it directly to the joint account Vanessa had set up, the one designated for household and Margaret's care. I kept just enough for gas, scrubs, and instant coffee. I was doing my part. I was contributing. The problem was, my contribution was invisible. Because I was asleep during the day and at work all night, Vanessa became the sole, visible caregiver in the eyes of the neighborhood. She was the one bringing Margaret to daytime doctor's appointments. She was the one bringing casseroles to church potlucks, sighing about how tiring it all was. I'd hear it from neighbors at the grocery store. You're so lucky your grandmother has Vanessa. She's a saint. The way she manages everything. A saint. Meanwhile, I was the one coming home at dawn, exhausted, to sit with Grandma from 7:30 until 9, coaxing her to eat the breakfast Vanessa had left, usually cold toast, and massaging her stiff, arthritic hands. Before I collapsed into bed, Vanessa's caregiving was a performance for an audience. Mine was the quiet, unglamorous work no one saw. And my father? Eric? He was the audience. He chose to be. He saw Vanessa's performance and he applauded, because it meant he didn't have to step on stage. Anytime a real conflict arose, a disagreement over medication or money, he would physically leave the room. I'm just going to check on the lawnmower, he'd mutter, fading into the background, leaving me and Margaret to face Vanessa's tightening grip alone. His weakness wasn't just a flaw, it was the foundation Vanessa built her power on. The first major shift happened after Margaret's fall. She tripped on the rug Vanessa had helpfully placed in the hall and fractured her hip. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks. It was a nightmare. I'd work my night shift, drive straight to the hospital to sit with her, sleep in the vinyl visitor's chair, and then go back to work. Vanessa used that time perfectly. She arrived at the hospital on the day of discharge, armed with a stack of papers and a sympathetic notary. "Margaret, dear," she'd cooed, fluffing a pillow. "The hospital administrator says we really need to get the paperwork in order, just in case, a power of attorney, so I can handle the bills and talk to the doctors for you. It's just simpler to get all the red tape out of the way." Grandma, hazy on painkillers and exhausted, looked at me. I tried to speak. "Maybe we should wait. Let Mr. Harrington look at—" "Charlie, don't complicate things," Vanessa snapped, her smile never wavering. "This is just standard procedure. We're trying to make your grandmother's life easier." Margaret, too tired to fight, eventually signed. She didn't sign the full, durable power of attorney she'd always resisted, but she signed enough. She signed a partial, financial power, just for the medical bills and household accounts. But a crack in the dam is all the water needs. The changes started small. I came home one day and the entryway felt empty. The antique porcelain set, the one my great-grandmother had brought from Germany, was gone from the curio cabinet. "Where's the porcelain?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Oh, thank goodness," Vanessa said, polishing a wineglass. "I found a buyer. An appraiser said they were worth a small fortune. We need to be practical. Charlie, her new prescriptions aren't cheap, and the insurance copay is astronomical. We're selling off the clutter to pay for the necessities." Clutter. A few weeks later, my great-grandfather's pocket watch, the one that always sat on the mantel, vanished. "That went toward the new wheelchair ramp," Vanessa explained brightly. I knew, instinctively, that she was lying. The ramp had been installed by a local church charity, but when I tried to bring it up, she produced a tangle of receipts for other things, adult diapers, nutritional supplements, bandages, and accused me of not appreciating her financial savvy. I was the nurse, she was the manager. I was being drowned in paperwork I was too tired to fight. When I tried to talk to Grandma about it, she'd wave a frail hand. Her eyes clouded with a sadness I couldn't quite reach. "It's just things. Charlie, don't worry about the things." She would change the subject, forcing a brightness into her voice. "Tell me about your patients. Did that nice Mr. Abernathy finally get his blood pressure down?" She'd make me talk for hours about my dream, the one I'd half-jokingly shared with her years ago, my fantasy of opening a small, low-cost community clinic in a poor neighborhood, a place for people who fell through the cracks. "The Margaret Hale Memorial Clinic," I'd joked. "You'll do it," she'd said, her voice firm, ignoring my joke. "You'll find a way. You're the only one of us who knows how to build something that lasts." She clung to my future because, I realize now, she knew her present was being stolen. Vanessa's control over the medical information became absolute. As a nurse, I knew the questions to ask, but Vanessa started taking all the calls from the specialists. How was her endocrinologist appointment? What did Dr. Patel say about her A1C levels? I'd ask. "Oh, fine. Everything's fine," Vanessa would say, sorting mail. "He said her numbers are a little high, but stable. Don't you worry your head about it. I'm handling it." She was deliberately minimizing. I'd find the after-visit summaries in the recycling bin 2 days later, and a little high was actually dangerously uncontrolled. She was filtering the information. Keeping me, the actual medical professional in the house, in the dark. She was making herself the sole gatekeeper of my grandmother's life. The moment I knew, the moment my creeping fear turned into cold certainty, was an afternoon in July. I was home, asleep, but a construction crew started jackhammering the sidewalk outside, and I woke up, groggy and disoriented. I went downstairs for water. Vanessa was on the back patio, on the phone with her sister, her voice carrying through the open screen door. She thought I was dead to the world until my 4 p.m. alarm. "Oh, it's just a matter of time now. Cindy," she was saying, and I heard her laugh. A light, tinkling sound. Eric is useless, of course, but he signs whatever I put in front of him. The house will be mine. Clean and simple. I've already talked to a realtor about an appraisal. My blood went cold. What about the nurse? Her sister must have asked. Charlie? Vanessa scoffed. Please, she's so grateful to have a roof over her head. She won't make a peep. Once everything is settled, I'll let her have her old bedroom furniture as a keepsake. Maybe she can rent a room somewhere. She was planning to throw me out with the chipped teacups. That night, I confronted my father. I found him in the garage, fiddling with a car engine that hadn't run in 5 years. Dad, we have to talk about the will, about the house. He flinched, not looking up. Charlie, not now. I'm busy. I heard Vanessa on the phone. She's planning to sell the house as soon as she's gone. She said she's going to get everything. He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a familiar, weary panic. Charlie, stop it. You're upsetting yourself. Vanessa is handling the estate. That's what wives do. It's complicated. Just let your mother handle it. You just focus on your job. Focus on your grandmother. She's not my mother, I yelled, and the sound echoed in the dusty garage. He shrank back. Don't do this. Don't make things difficult. Your grandmother is sick. The last thing she needs is fighting. He had twisted it. My fear for my future, for my grandmother's legacy, was now an attack on her health. I was the problem. I was the one making things difficult. I walked away from him, my heart heavy with a profound, aching loneliness. I was trapped. I was caught between my love for my grandmother, my fear of Vanessa, and the heartbreaking uselessness of my own father. I was terrified that I would wake up one morning and find myself homeless. My entire life, my entire past, erased by a woman who saw me as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. That evening, I was sitting by Grandma's bed, holding her hand. The rest of the house was quiet. I was trying not to cry, trying to be the steady person she always said I was. She must have sensed it. Her grip, surprisingly strong, tightened on my fingers. She turned her head on the pillow. Her eyes, though clouded with age, were sharp and clear. Charlie, she whispered, and I had to lean in close to hear her. I'm here, Grandma. There are things, she said, her breath catching, that greedy people can't see. They're too busy looking at the shiny, obvious things. They don't look under the rugs. They don't look in the dark corners. I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought, briefly, that she was delirious. You just live your life, she whispered, her thumb rubbing the back of my hand. You live it right. You be honest. You be the good hands I know you are. The rest. I've taken care of the rest. I just nodded, patting her hand. Okay, Grandma, you rest. But the words stayed with me. I've taken care of the rest. It became my lifeline, a small, flickering candle in the dark, even as things got worse. As her health declined rapidly, Vanessa's talk became more open, more urgent. We really need to simplify her will, she'd say to my father over dinner, in front of me. It's also old-fashioned. We need to update it, consolidate things. It's the responsible thing to do. I was at Lighthouse Springs, in the middle of a brutal 12-hour shift. I was charting a patient's vitals, my eyes burning from exhaustion, my scrubs smelling like antiseptic and cafeteria coffee. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a call from the charge nurse. It was a text from Vanessa. No greeting, no kindness, just 5 cold words. Grandma is very weak. Come home tomorrow. I drove home in a fog. The 5 words from Vanessa's text burning on my phone screen. I had called out from my shift, my hands still shaking from the adrenaline of a failed code, and driven the 40 miles in a state of numb panic. I walked into the house, and the silence was different. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of Grandma Margaret reading in her chair. It was a heavy, medicated stillness, thick with the scent of rubbing alcohol and the lavender spray Vanessa used to mask the smell of illness. I went straight to her room. Vanessa was there, of course, plumping a pillow with a look of performative concern. I braced myself. But the woman in the bed, it wasn't my grandmother, not the one I knew. Margaret Hale had been a sturdy woman, all solid presence and strong opinions, her hands always busy. This woman was a skeleton draped in papery, bruised skin. The sight of her, so diminished, so utterly frail, stole my breath. But then she opened her eyes, and the fire was still there. Her gaze was weak, but it was razor sharp. She looked right past Vanessa and locked eyes with me, and I saw her. She was still in there. Then, her eyes flickered to Vanessa, and that old familiar wariness, the one I'd seen for years, hardened her expression. She was trapped, but she was not defeated. "Charlie," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rustle, like leaves skittering on pavement. "I'm here, Grandma." I rushed to the bed, ignoring Vanessa, and took her hand. It felt like a bundle of cold twigs, impossibly light. "I need," she paused, taking a rattling, shallow breath. "I need to talk to Charlie, alone." Vanessa's smile froze. "Oh, Margaret, dear, you're so tired. Whatever you need to say, you can say to both of us. We're family, remember?" "Alone, Vanessa." The command, though faint, was unmistakable. Vanessa's face tightened. The mask of the devoted caregiver cracked, revealing the raw annoyance beneath. She shot me a look of pure venom, then smoothed it over instantly for Margaret. "Of course, dear. Anything you want. I'll just be right outside if you need anything. Don't tire her out. Charlie." She backed out of the room, her movements reluctant. She pulled the heavy oak door almost closed, but she didn't latch it. She left it open just a crack. We both saw it. We both heard the faint creak of the floorboards in the hall as she settled in, positioning herself to listen. Grandma's eyes met mine. In that moment, we were co-conspirators in her final act. "Closer," she whispered. I leaned down until my ear was almost touching her lips, the faint, powdery scent of her lotion mixing with the sour smell of sickness. "She thinks she has it all," Grandma breathed, her eyes fixed on the door. "She thinks the papers, the ones in the safe, are the beginning and the end. She doesn't know." "Grandma, don't talk. Just rest." I was terrified. This felt like delirium. The end-of-life rally, we called it at the hospital. The bright flash of clarity before the end. "No, you listen." Her fingers, though frail, gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "I have prepared things set aside, just for you." "What things? The locket? Your recipes?" "No." She was getting agitated, frustrated by my denseness. "Listen to the words. Charlie, if there comes a day when you feel like you don't belong in this house anymore, when she tries to tell you this isn't your home." Her eyes bored into mine, trying to force the message into my skull through sheer will. "You remember your room, Charlie. You remember your bed, and you remember the things that belong to you." I nodded, my throat tight with tears, completely lost. "Okay, Grandma. I remember. I promise. It's my room." I was placating her. I was soothing a dying woman I thought was confused. She knew it. She saw my confusion and it made her angry. "You don't understand," she rasped, shaking my wrist. "You must understand. Your room, your bed." She repeated it, her voice cracking with the effort, desperate. "It's not just furniture. Your room, your bed." The intensity scared me. "I understand," I lied, trying to calm her. "I understand. The bed, my room." She seemed to accept this, for a moment, and her grip relaxed. Her other hand, hidden by the thin blanket, fumbled for a moment. She pulled out a small, tarnished silver chain. Dangling from it was a tiny, ornate key, the kind one might use for a music box or a small diary. "This," she whispered, pressing it into my palm. The metal was cold. "Take this. It's beautiful. What does it open?" "It's not a key to open a door," she said. her voice fading again with the effort. "It's a key to remember. To remember you always have a way out. Always." "Grandma." "Put it on, now." It was an order. "Under your shirt. Don't let her see it." My fingers fumbled with the tiny clasp. The metal was cold against my hot skin as I fastened it around my neck. I tucked it under the collar of my scrubs. It felt heavy, like a secret I didn't understand. "Good," she sighed. She closed her eyes. My good girl, my steady hands. The door creaked open. Vanessa glided in, her eyes sharp, darting from my collar, where the chain had disappeared, to Margaret's closed eyes. "Is she all right? You tired her out, didn't you? What were you talking about?" "She was just reminiscing," I mumbled, stepping back. "She gave me this," I said, feeling compelled to tell a half-truth. I pulled the chain out slightly. Vanessa's expression was a flash of pure annoyance. It was a tangible object she hadn't controlled. Then, just as quickly, she masked it with pity. "Oh, how sweet. A little trinket." She turned to me, her voice dripping with false sympathy as we stepped into the hall, pulling the door closed behind us. "Charlie, honey, you have to understand. She's not herself. She's clinging to things. You mustn't take her rambling seriously. It's the medication." She walked away, and I knew she'd already filed the incident away as the meaningless gesture of a confused old woman. But later that day, I heard her on the phone with Aunt Clara. "It's just sad. Really, Charlie is hovering, waiting for handouts. She just had Margaret give her some old costume jewelry, right in front of me, taking advantage when she's so weak. It's a shame." Those last 2 weeks were a blur of impossible choices. I was running a race I couldn't win. I was terrified to go to work, terrified to leave her alone with Vanessa. But I couldn't afford to stop. My shifts at Lighthouse became a strange kind of torture. My body was there, charting vitals and hanging IV bags. But my mind was in that house, listening, waiting. I'd work my 12-hour night shift, drive home at 7:15 in the morning with my eyes burning, and sit by her bed, holding her hand while she drifted in and out of a shallow, morphine-fueled sleep. Vanessa, meanwhile, was a general organizing an invasion. "I've made the preliminary calls," she announced one afternoon over lunch, as if discussing catering. "Donahue's funeral home. They are very tasteful. I've already spoken to them about a lovely cherrywood casket." "Grandma didn't want cherrywood," I mumbled, half asleep on the recliner. She always said she wanted simple pine. She hated fussy things." Vanessa looked at me as if I'd spoken in tongues. "Charlie, this is not the time for your opinions. I am handling the arrangements. You are, frankly, exhausted and emotional. Let the adults manage the logistics." She took my father to the funeral home to sign the papers. She selected the hymns. She wrote the obituary and read it aloud for my father's approval. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It painted Vanessa as the devoted, round-the-clock caregiver who had sacrificed everything for her beloved mother-in-law. My name was mentioned once, in passing, along with the other distant relatives. She is also survived by her granddaughter, Charlie. The call came on a Tuesday morning. It was raining, a soft, miserable drizzle that blurred the world outside the hospital windows. I wasn't at the house. I was at work. A patient in room 304, a sweet man I was very fond of, had thrown a pulmonary embolism and coded at 4 a.m. We had worked on him for 45 minutes, a brutal, desperate marathon of chest compressions and epinephrine, but we'd lost him. I was in the break room, covered in sweat, my hands still shaking. When my phone buzzed, it was my father, his voice thick and strange. "Charlie, she's gone. She passed about 10 minutes ago. It was peaceful, in her sleep." I just hung up. I had been resuscitating a stranger while my grandmother died. I hadn't been there. I had been saving someone else, and I hadn't even been successful. I had left her alone with Vanessa at the very end. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in my stomach that threatened to pull me through the floor. By the time I got home, the house was already full. The funeral home had been called. Vanessa was on the phone, her voice crisp and efficient. I walked past them all, a ghost in my own scrubs, and went to her room. The bed was empty. The sheets were already stripped. The funeral was 2 days later. It was, as Vanessa had planned. Tasteful, the cherrywood casket was surrounded by enormous, expensive sprays of white roses. Vanessa, draped in a black veil, stood at the front, accepting condolences. She was magnificent. Her grief was theatrical, operatic. She wept into a delicate lace handkerchief. She leaned heavily on my father's arm, a perfect portrait of devastated but dignified sorrow. The pastor, who had only met my grandmother twice, spoke glowingly of Margaret's final years, surrounded by the loving, selfless care of her devoted daughter-in-law, Vanessa. I sat in the second row, invisible. I was a shadow, a footnote at my own grandmother's funeral. I watched Vanessa soak up the praise, the sympathy, the validation. She had successfully rewritten the narrative. She was the hero. I was the peripheral character. After the service, we stood outside the funeral home under a gray, spitting sky. Relatives were milling around, unsure what to do. I was just standing by a pillar, trying to breathe air that didn't smell of lilies, when Mr. Harrington separated himself from the crowd and approached me. "Charlie," he said, his voice low. He looked uncomfortable, but his eyes were kind. "Mr. Harrington, I am so very sorry for your loss. She was one of a kind. She spoke of you often." "Thank you." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder. Vanessa was about 50 feet away, holding court by the hearse, still weeping beautifully for her audience. "Listen," he said, turning back to me, his voice dropping even lower. "I can't discuss specifics right now. It's not the time or place, but I need you to be at the house tonight, 7 o'clock, for the reading." "Vanessa said it would just be her and my father," I said numbly. "No," he was firm. "Margaret was extremely specific. She left a set of private instructions with me, separate from the main will. They concern you, Charlie. They specifically concern you and your old bedroom." My head snapped up. "My bedroom?" "I can't say more. Just be there and be prepared." Margaret was a very meticulous woman. Before I could ask what he meant, he squeezed my arm gently and walked away, blending back into the somber crowd. I stood there, stunned. From across the lawn, I saw Vanessa. She had stopped talking. She was watching me. Her performance had faltered for a second. She was watching Mr. Harrington walk away, and she was watching me. Her eyes narrowed into slits. Suspicion. She didn't know what had been said, but she knew an unauthorized conversation had taken place. She quickly recovered, dabbing her eyes and turning back to my aunt. I saw her pat her designer handbag, the one I knew contained the keys to the house safe, where the main will was kept. She was nervous, but she was still confident. She believed she held all the cards. I drove back to the house in a daze. The guilt was still there, a heavy, cold stone, but now it had a new companion, a tiny, terrifying spark of confusion. I sat on a hardback chair in the living room, surrounded by platters of untouched sandwiches and the hushed, awkward conversations of mourning. I clutched the funeral program. On the cover was a smiling photo of Grandma, taken 5 years ago, before she got sick. "Your room, your bed." The words echoed in my head, no longer sounding like the ramblings of a dying woman. They sounded like a map. "They specifically concern you and your old bedroom." I looked down at the photo, at her smiling, knowing eyes. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what she had done. But as I sat there, invisible in my black dress, I realized my grandmother had been speaking to me, and she hadn't been delirious at all. The hours after the funeral were obscene. The house filled up again, but the somber silence of the morning was gone, replaced by the clinking of glasses and the murmur of casual conversation. My father's cousins had brought platters of cold cuts and potato salad. It wasn't a house of mourning anymore. It was a wake, a catered party. People were eating turkey sandwiches and talking about the weather, about their jobs. I heard my Uncle Ray laughing, a loud barking sound, in the dining room. I stood in the corner of the living room, a ghost in my own home, and I felt a profound, bottomless disgust. I heard two of my father's cousins, men I hadn't seen in 5 years, standing by the bay window. "Good bones," one of them said, tapping the wall. "This neighborhood, the market being what it is, she's sitting on a gold mine." They were assessing the value of my grandmother's life in square footage. Vanessa was in her element. The veil was off, the theatrical grief packed away. She was the new lady of the manor, and she was busy. She moved through the rooms with a brisk, proprietary energy. I saw her by the front door, accepting a small, white box from a locksmith who had just finished his work on the front door. She was already changing the locks. She moved to the mahogany desk, her hand going straight to the small brass hook where my grandmother's car keys had hung for 20 years. She slipped them into her pocket. Then, she picked up the silver bowl from the entryway table, the one filled with condolence envelopes, stuffed with checks and cash, and carried it into the study. Closing the door firmly behind her, she was securing the assets. Mr. Harrington arrived at precisely 6:30, his face grim. Vanessa must have been waiting for him, because she intercepted him before he could even take his coat off. "Howard, thank you for coming," she said, her voice low and proprietary, placing her hand on his forearm and steering him toward the study, the one she had just exited. "I'm sure we can make this quick and simple. Just Eric and myself. We must respect the last will Margaret and I prepared." I drifted closer, pretending to look at a framed photo on the wall. I needed to hear. Mr. Harrington stopped walking, forcing her to stop with him. He was a tall man, and he looked down at her, his expression unreadable. He delicately, deliberately, removed her hand from his sleeve. "Vanessa, as I mentioned at the funeral home, Margaret left very specific instructions. There is a confidentiality clause I am bound to honor." "A clause? What on earth for?" Vanessa's voice had a new edge to it, the sweetness gone. "Margaret's instructions state that Charlie Monroe must be present for the entire reading. It is a prerequisite. It is non-negotiable." Vanessa's perfectly made-up face tightened. I could see the calculations whirring behind her eyes. "Howard, she's just the granddaughter. She's a child. She's emotional. She is 28, an adult, and her presence is required," Harrington said, his voice final. 7 o'clock. All of you." He stepped around her and walked into the living room, leaving her standing in the hall, her knuckles white. She looked furious. A few minutes later, my father's cousin, a man named Gary who had already had too much sherry, stumbled over to me. He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Charlie girl," he slurred, his breath hot and sour. Tough day. But your grandma? Smart lady." "What do you mean?" I asked, pulling away from the smell. "Smart," he boomed, and several people looked over. "Good thing Vanessa was there, you know? Pushed her to get her affairs in order. That new will. She signed it just a few weeks ago. You know, real smart. Good thing she got that done before. Well, you know." My blood turned to ice. A new will, a few weeks ago. One that Vanessa pushed her to sign. It was over. Everything she had planned, all her maneuvering, it had worked. I was nothing. I was a guest. I turned and walked away, my head buzzing. I needed air. I fled to the kitchen, the one room that still felt like hers. I just wanted a glass of water, to stand in the place where she and I had been safe. But Vanessa was already there. She had a large, black industrial trash bag open on the floor. She was pulling things from the pantry, old, half-used bags of flour, expired cans, and then she reached for the small, worn wooden recipe box that had sat on that counter for my entire life. It was battered, the painted roses on the lid chipped, but it was filled with her elegant, looping handwriting, her apple pie, her cinnamon bread, her Christmas cookies. It was her. She held it over the open mouth of the trash bag. "What are you doing?" My voice came out cracked and sharp. Vanessa jumped, startled. She hadn't heard me come in. God, Charlie, you move like a ghost. I'm cleaning. As I told you, this house is suffocating in clutter. She was a pack rat. That's not clutter, I said, my voice shaking. That's her recipe box. It's a pile of stained index cards, she snapped. Her patience, her entire performance, gone. It's garbage. I'm making room for my own things. She tilted her hand to let it drop. No! I surged forward and snatched the box from her hand. It was an involuntary, desperate movement. The box was solid in my grasp. You can't just throw this away. Vanessa straightened up. Slowly, the mask didn't just crack. It dissolved. The face underneath was cold, hard, and full of contempt. I can, she hissed. And I will. Who do you think you are, ordering me around? You have no say in this house. You have no rights here. I am her granddaughter. I live here. You lived here, she spat, jabbing a finger toward my chest. Like a parasite. You lived here because my husband was too weak to say no, and his mother was a sentimental old fool. You think you mattered? You were a charity case. Charlie, a piece of baggage my husband brought into this family, and I have been putting up with you for 16 years. The rage was so sudden, so cold, it made me steady. The grief vanished, replaced by a crystalline clarity. I was not a charity case, I said, my voice low and trembling. I'm a registered nurse. I paid rent. I have sent money to this house every single week for the last 6 years. I paid for her prescriptions when you were buying designer shoes. I paid for... The crack of the slap echoed in the tiled kitchen. It was so fast, so brutal. Her open palm connected with my cheek and my lip. Throwing my head to the side, I stumbled back, crashing hard against the pantry door. The pantry door flew open, and bottles of olive oil and vinegar rattled on the shelves. The sound was absolute. It silenced the entire house. The dull, muffled conversations in the living room and dining room stopped. Dead. I tasted it instantly, the sharp, hot, metallic tang of my own blood. My lip was split. I looked up, my cheek burning, my eyes watering from the impact. Vanessa stood there, her hand still raised slightly, her chest heaving. She was not horrified. She was not remorseful. She was victorious. And in the doorway to the dining room, I saw them, my father, my Uncle Ray, Aunt Clara. They were all standing there, frozen, watching. No one moved, no one spoke, no one came to help me. Aunt Clara was the first to break. She looked down at her shoes. Uncle Ray cleared his throat and turned back to the sherry bottle. And my father? My father just closed his eyes. Now, Vanessa, he whispered, his voice weak, not moving an inch toward me. She's just tired. We're all upset. She's upset? Vanessa shrieked, her voice pitching to a near hysterical level. She accuses me of stealing? She tries to tell me what I can and cannot do in my own house, after everything I did for that old woman? She turned back to me, her face a mask of pure, triumphant malice. The slap had given her the power she always wanted. You have 1 week, Charlie, she said, her voice dropping back to that cold, menacing hiss. You heard me. The reading is in a few minutes. It doesn't matter. After it's done, I want you out. Get your things and get out of my house. If you are not gone by next Monday, I will have you removed for trespassing. I didn't say anything. I didn't wipe the blood from my lip. I just held the recipe box clutched to my chest. I looked at my father. His eyes were still closed. He was a coward. I looked at my aunts and uncles, who were already pretending to be fascinated by the wallpaper. They were accomplices. I was 28 years old. My grandmother was dead, and I was completely, utterly alone. The pain in my face was a strange, clarifying fire. It burned away the last of my tears, the last of my childish hope that someone would step in. I turned, my back straight, and walked out of the kitchen. I pushed past my silent, staring relatives. I walked up the stairs, each step heavy and deliberate. I went into my bedroom. I closed the door. and I turned the key in the lock. The click of the bolt sliding home was the most final sound I had ever heard. I leaned against the door, the wood cool against my back. I allowed myself 60 seconds. I cried, but they were not tears of grief. They were hot, scalding tears of rage. My cheek was on fire. My lip was swelling. She had hit me. She had hit me, in my grandmother's house, hours after the funeral, and no one had stopped her. When you feel like the adults in this house are not on your side anymore, my grandmother's voice, it was suddenly so clear, as if she were whispering in my ear. You remember this room. I pushed myself off the door. I was done crying. The shock was fading, replaced by a cold, hard numbness. I was a guest. I was a parasite. I had 1 week. I had to pack. I looked around the room, my room, and felt like a stranger. I'd have to find my old suitcases. They were under the bed, probably covered in dust. I got on my hands and knees, the floorboards cool against my skin. My cheek throbbed with every pulse of my heart. I lifted the dust ruffle, peering into the darkness beneath. And my hand, reaching for a suitcase handle, brushed against the wooden bed frame. I felt it. The seam. The small, vertical line in the decorative molding that my fingers had found before. The piece that was loose. Greedy people can't see. They don't look under the rugs. They don't look in the dark corners. My heart didn't just beat. It slammed against my ribs, a single, painful thump. It wasn't a memory. It was an instruction. My fingers, trembling, fumbled with the molding. I pushed it sideways. It clicked. It slid open. The floorboard beneath it, the one that was a slightly different color. I jammed my fingernails, sticky with my own drying blood, into the crack. I pulled. The board resisted, then came up with a soft, scraping sound, releasing the faint smell of old wood and dust. It revealed a small, dark, hollow space. And inside, wrapped in a piece of faded blue flannel, was a box. A simple, dark wood box, about the size of a book. Tucked beside it was a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed, not just with glue, but with crisscrossing strips of heavy-duty packing tape, as if to protect it from water or from time. On the front, in my grandmother's familiar, spidery, but determined handwriting, were 4 words. For Charlie, open after I am gone. My breath hitched. Downstairs, I heard the doorbell ring. Harrington. The reading was about to begin. I heard Vanessa's voice, suddenly sweet as honey. Howard, come in. Come in. Can I get you something? They were starting the show. They were about to read the piece of paper that would erase me. I pulled the box and the envelope from the darkness. They were cool to the touch. I fitted the floorboard back into place. I slid the molding shut. I scrambled to my feet and ran to the door, checking the lock one more time. It was secure. I sat on the floor, my back against the locked door, the heavy box on my lap. My cheek was on fire. My life was in ruins. But as I held that envelope, my fingers tracing the outline of her handwriting, I knew, with a sudden, savage certainty, that the show was just getting started, and I was holding the real script. My fingers were numb. Downstairs, I heard the faint murmur of voices. Mr. Harrington? My father? Vanessa? Her voice like honeyed poison, offering him a drink. The performance was beginning. My hands, slick with a mixture of sweat and the drying blood from my lip, fumbled with the envelope. The packing tape was thick and brittle with age. I had to use my fingernail to tear a corner, then rip it open. The paper inside was thick, high quality, and covered in my grandmother's hand. I unfolded the letter. It was several pages long. My eyes scanned the first sentence, and a cold shock went through me, sharper than the sting on my cheek. My dearest Charlie, if you are reading this, it means that things have happened just as I suspected they would. It means I am gone, and Vanessa has finally shown her true face to you. I had to read it twice. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't a sentimental farewell. This was a battle plan. You must be frightened, the letter continued. And you must feel alone. You are not. I have been watching. I saw the woman your father brought into this house 16 years ago. I saw her hunger. I knew from the first day that she was a person who measured love in dollars and cents. She believed I was a frail old woman, easy to fool. She never knew that I never, not once, allowed her access to the full picture of my finances. The accounts she managed were only the ones I allowed her to see. My mind reeled. The joint account, the one I'd been paying into, the one Vanessa had used for necessities, it had been a test, a trap. When you turned 18, she wrote, the same year you decided to become a nurse, I did something your father and his wife know nothing about. I went to see Mr. Harrington, not the son, but his father, the senior partner. We enacted a private legal transfer. It is a document, filed with the county clerk that very year, that grants you a remainder interest in this property, a secret ownership, legally, a portion of this house, specifically the footprint of your bedroom and a percentage of the common areas, has been yours for 10 years. She cannot sell this house from under you because she does not fully own it. She never has. I stopped, my head spinning. A remainder interest, a legal term I barely understood, but the implication was staggering. I had been an owner, not a guest. The will she is so eager to have read tonight, the letter went on. The one I know she pressured me and your father to update after my fall, may indeed say what she wants it to. I was weak, and I was forced to sign things under duress. I was an old woman, and I chose my battles. I signed her useless paper because I knew it would be nullified by the contents of this box. This is my second line of defense. Charlie, this is my real last will and testament, in a form she would never think to look for. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the paper. I set the letter aside and turned my attention to the wooden box. It was heavy, made of dark, polished cherry wood, with no lock. I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper, carbon, and a faint trace of her lavender sachet filled the air. It was packed. On top was a thick, blue-backed document, bound with a red ribbon. It was a certified copy of a last will and testament. My grandmother's name, Margaret Hale, was on the front. I opened it. The date, printed clearly at the top, was from 10 years ago, the week after my 18th birthday. I scanned the legalese, my eyes jumping to the key phrases. My son, Eric Monroe, a stipend. To my granddaughter, Charlie Monroe, in recognition of her unfailing love, I bequeath the remainder of my estate, including my primary residence, all financial accounts, and all personal effects. She is my primary heir. I was the heir. I was the primary heir. The will Vanessa had in the safe, the new one, was a fraud, procured from a dying woman who had already given everything to me. My heart was hammering. I dug deeper. Beneath the will was a simple, folded deed of title. It wasn't for this house. The address was for a parcel of land, 22 acres, on the outskirts of town, near the old highway. I had no idea she owned this. I'd never heard of it. I looked at the names on the deed. Margaret Hale and Charlie Monroe, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. Joint tenants. I knew what that meant from my medical paperwork. It meant that when one owner passed, the other automatically became the sole owner. It didn't pass through a will. It didn't go to probate. It was immune to any will, new or old. As of the moment my grandmother died, that land, her largest asset, I was sure of it, had become mine, as simply as if she had handed it to me. Vanessa didn't even know it existed. My fingers brushed against something small and cold, a silver USB flash drive. Taped to it was a small, folded piece of notepaper, her handwriting again, this time more shaky, more recent. Give this to Mr. Harrington if you feel it is necessary. Do not show Vanessa. It is difficult to listen to. A chill went down my spine. Difficult to listen to. Audio? Video? What had she been recording? The rest of the box was filled with papers, not legal documents, but bank statements, credit card receipts. They were from the household account, the one Vanessa managed, the one I paid into. I pulled out a statement from 8 months ago, and I saw the charges. A withdrawal for $800 at a high-end spa. Ocean View Retreat, the line item read. I remembered that weekend. Vanessa had told me and my father that she was visiting a grief counselor to deal with the stress of Margaret's decline. I pulled out another, a credit card statement, paid in full from Grandma's account. A charge for $1,200 at a designer boutique I'd never heard of. A charge for $400 at an expensive restaurant downtown. This wasn't for medication. This wasn't for copays. This was theft. This was elder abuse, documented, dated, and paid for with my money and hers. She had been funding a life of luxury while telling me we couldn't afford brand-name cereal. I felt a wave of nausea so profound I had to lean my head against the bed frame. I was crying, but the tears were hot, angry, and bitter. She hadn't just been cruel. She had been a common criminal. I picked up the letter again, my hands shaking. I read the next part. I know Vanessa. She is a bully. She is a coward. I know there will be a day, probably soon, when she will believe she has won. She will have her piece of paper. She will have the house keys. She will have your father's weak signature. And she will feel powerful. Let her think so. Let her have her small, temporary victory. I needed you to be strong enough to hold this truth in your hands without letting it turn you into her. I needed you to be an adult, not just in age, but in character. I was sobbing now, my face buried in my hands. The sound was muffled, lost in the heavy silence of the room. She hadn't been a victim. She hadn't been a frail, confused old woman. She had been a warrior. She had seen the attack coming, and unable to fight it head-on with her failing body. She had built a fortress of paper, a maze of legal traps, and had simply waited. She had been fighting for me, for years, in total silence. I read the last page of the letter. When you use these things, Charlie, and you must use them, I want you to remember this. Your goal is not to destroy anyone. Your father is a weak man, and Vanessa is a deeply broken and greedy one. You cannot save them. Your goal is to protect yourself, your future, and the truth of what is right. Get your revenge by living with more dignity than they ever could. Use what I have given you to build something, not to tear something down. Be my steady hands. My tears were blurring the words. I wiped them away, my hand brushing against the chain on my neck. At the very bottom of the box, nestled in the faded flannel lining, was one last item. It was a small, ornate, tarnished silver key. I pulled the chain out from under my shirt. I looked at the key she had given me on her deathbed, the one I had thought was a sentimental trinket. I unhooked it from the chain. I slid it into the small keyhole on the front of the cherry wood box. It fit perfectly. It was a confirmation, a final, tangible sign. Everything, the warnings, the strange words, the necklace, the floorboard, it had all been part of a plan, a long, patient, brilliant plan. Downstairs, I heard a chair scrape. I heard Mr. Harrington clear his throat. "Shall we begin?" he called out. I stood up. My legs were shaky. I looked at my reflection in the dresser mirror. My hair was a mess. My eyes were red and swollen, and on my cheek, a dark, ugly bruise was beginning to form, with a matching split on my lip. I felt the pain, a dull throb, but it was distant. I packed the will, the deed, and the bank statements into the envelope with the letter. I slid the USB drive into my pocket. I relocked the box and tucked it back under the floorboard, replacing the panel, sliding the molding shut. The house's secret was safe again. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the brass knob. I took a deep breath. Vanessa wanted me to be a child, a parasite, a victim. I was about to show her, and my father, and all of them, exactly who Margaret Hale's granddaughter was. I was the heir. I was the owner, and I was the one holding all the cards. I turned the lock. When I walked back down the stairs, the atmosphere in the living room had congealed. The last of the relatives, my father's cousin Gary, now looking sober and nervous, and my great-aunt Clara, Her eyes sharp and expectant, were seated on the sofa. My father, Eric, stood by the mantelpiece, looking pale and restless, unable to settle. And then there was Vanessa. She had not taken the sofa. She had taken my grandmother's large floral armchair, the throne. She sat upright, her posture immaculate, her hands folded primly in her lap. She had arranged her face into a mask of solemn duty, the grieving widow-in-law, prepared to accept the burden of leadership. She watched me as I entered the room. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, to my cheek, to the swollen, split lip. I saw it. A flash of cold, reptilian satisfaction. She believed that slap had been the final punctuation mark on her total victory. I did not sit near my father. I took the small, hard-backed chair opposite her, by the cold fireplace. I placed my handbag on my lap. Inside, the thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with my grandmother's real legacy, felt like a stone. I didn't meet her gaze. I looked at Mr. Harrington. He sat at the mahogany desk, the one Vanessa had been sorting keys on just hours before. He clicked open his heavy leather briefcase and pulled out a single, official-looking document, bound in a blue cover. The room was so silent I could hear the antique clock on the mantel ticking, each thunk sounding unnaturally loud. Harrington cleared his throat. "We are all here, as requested by Margaret Hale, for the reading of her final will and testament, dated," he paused, adjusting his glasses to look at the paper, "April 4th of this year." My blood went cold. April 4th, just 6 weeks ago, the one my cousin Gary had slurred about, the one Vanessa had pushed her to sign, right after her fall, when she was weak and on painkillers. Vanessa leaned forward, her expression a perfect performance of sorrow and nervous anticipation. Harrington began to read. The legal language was thick, a fog of herebys and whereases. He went through the small bequests first, a few $1,000s to the local library, her collection of novels to Aunt Clara. I knew for a fact Vanessa had already helped her go through them and take the valuable first editions. Then, he got to the main asset. Regarding my primary residence, located at 214 Arbor Street, and all associated financial accounts not otherwise specified. Vanessa held her breath. I saw her hand, resting on the arm of the chair, clench. "I bequeath, in full, to my beloved son, Eric Monroe, and to his wife, my devoted daughter-in-law, Vanessa Monroe." A soft, controlled sigh escaped Vanessa's lips. Her hand, which had been clenched, visibly relaxed. She placed it on my father's forearm, a gesture of shared, solemn ownership. Eric himself looked profoundly relieved, as if he had just avoided a scolding. Aunt Clara nodded, a small, satisfied smile. This was the correct, sensible outcome. My heart didn't just sink, it plummeted. Even holding the envelope, I felt a sudden, dizzying wave of doubt. What if my box was meaningless? What if this new, recent will superseded everything? "With the following binding condition," Harrington continued, his voice steady and unchanging. Vanessa's smile tightened. "Just a fraction. A condition?" "That they shall, in recognition of my deep and abiding love for her, provide suitable care, housing, and financial support for my granddaughter, Charlie Monroe, until such time as she is fully and completely independent." Vanessa's smile returned, brighter than before. It was a masterpiece. She had won. She had won the entire estate, and I was now, by law, her dependent, her charity case. She could hold this condition over my head for the rest of my life, defining independent as whatever she chose. She could, as she had threatened, give me a week and call me independent, or she could force me to live here as her servant. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a triumphant, condescending pity. She had won. "Well," Aunt Clara said into the silence, "that's that. A good, sensible will. Margaret was a practical woman." I said nothing. I kept my hands on my purse. I let them have it. I let her enjoy the win. Let her have her small, temporary victory. Grandma's letter had said, That concludes the reading of the will dated April 4th, Harrington said, folding the document and placing it neatly on the desk. Vanessa stood up, a clear signal that the meeting was adjourned. Thank you, Howard. It's all very clear. A terrible day, but a relief to have the logistics settled. Now, if you'll all excuse me, I have so many calls to make. Please sit down, Vanessa, Harrington said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking back into his briefcase. Her movement stalled. What for? It's done. No, it is not. Harrington pulled out a second envelope. This one was different. It wasn't a large legal document. It was a standard, letter-sized envelope, made of thick, cream-colored paper. The back was sealed, not with glue, but with a large, old-fashioned disc of dark red wax, impressed with my grandmother's signet H. What is that? Vanessa demanded, remaining standing, her authority instantly challenged. This, Harrington said, is a supplemental addendum to the estate. It was filed with my father's office over a year ago. It contains a specific, superseding clause, to be opened only in the event of her death, and read only in the presence of yourself, Eric, and Charlie Monroe. That's absurd, Vanessa snapped, her voice losing its honeyed edge. I was her power of attorney. I managed all her affairs. I would know about any addendum. She and I drew up the final will together. That, she pointed a sharp manicured finger at the document on the desk, is the only one that matters. On the contrary, Harrington said, his voice flat and cold. He turned the envelope over. On the back, written in my grandmother's familiar, spidery hand, was her signature, a date, and a notary's public stamp. This document is fully executed, notarized, and legally binding. It predates the will I just read, and its terms are specific. Please, sit down. The command in his voice was absolute. Vanessa sat. Her face was pale, her composure cracking, the mask of the grieving widow replaced by the sharp, feral look of a predator whose prey had just moved. Harrington took a small, silver letter opener from the desk. He slit the envelope and broke the wax seal. The sound was a sharp crack in the silent room. He unfolded the single sheet of paper. The addendum reads as follows, he said, his voice resonating with a new authority. It is my primary wish that my family live in peace. However, should I be unable to defend myself in my final years, this addendum shall serve as my voice. My father made a small, choking sound and sat down heavily on the sofa. Harrington continued, his eyes fixed on the page. I hereby state, if, at the time of my death, verifiable evidence is presented to my executor, Mr. Harrington, that any beneficiary of my will has engaged in the financial abuse, exploitation, or malicious neglect of my person, or has exerted undue influence in the creation of any subsequent testamentary documents. Vanessa stopped breathing. Then any and all bequests to that individual, or individuals, named in any will, dated before or after this addendum, shall be rendered immediately null and void. The room was a vacuum. No one breathed. In such an event, Harrington read, his voice gaining a terrible, righteous power, the entirety of my estate, real, financial, and personal, shall pass directly, and without contest, to my granddaughter, Charlie Monroe. Furthermore, she is instructed and empowered by me to use this evidence to pursue all available legal remedies, including civil and criminal charges, against said individuals. Silence, absolute, crushing silence. Vanessa was the first to move. She laughed. It was a high, thin, terrible sound, like glass breaking. Evidence? What evidence? That's preposterous. It's the rambling of a sick old woman. Who would have evidence? She turned her gaze on me, her eyes full of pure, undiluted scorn. What are you going to do, Charlie? Tell them I was mean to you? Tell them I took her recipe box? I didn't speak. I held her gaze. The bruise on my face throbbed. A dull, deep ache, slowly, deliberately. I placed my right hand on my handbag. my fingers resting on the thick, stiff envelope inside. The envelope that contained the 10-year-old will, the deed, and the bank statements. My other hand went to my pocket, where the small, cold USB drive rested. Vanessa saw the gesture. Her scoff faltered. Harrington saw it, too, and he nodded, once, as if expecting it. As a matter of fact, Vanessa, Harrington said, I was formally given new materials just this evening, from Charlie, as per Margaret's instructions. What? My father yelped, finally finding his voice. He looked at me, horrified, as if seeing me for the first time. Charlie? What materials? I have received, Harrington said, documentation which, on its face, appears to show significant and repeated financial irregularities, withdrawals from Mrs. Hale's accounts for large personal and non-medical expenditures, all made under your signature, Vanessa, as power of attorney. That's a lie, Vanessa shrieked, jumping to her feet. She gave me those things. They were gifts, as payment for my care, for my sacrifice. A $1,200 pair of shoes? Harrington asked, his voice deathly quiet. A weekend at a spa you claimed was a grief retreat? These materials suggest a clear and deliberate pattern of financial abuse. This is slander. You're in on it. Vanessa pointed a shaking finger at me. She did this. She forged those materials. She's a vindictive, ungrateful little... I was wondering if you might say that, Harrington said. He reached back into his briefcase. He pulled out another envelope. This one a standard, 9x12 manila envelope, already opened. Mrs. Hale was, as I mentioned, a very meticulous woman. She was also not a fool. She worried that her private stash, the one she kept hidden, might be found by the wrong person. So, 6 months ago, she mailed a package to my office, to be held in my private vault and opened only upon her death. He pulled out a set of papers. This is a notarized copy of her original 10-year-old will, naming Charlie as the primary heir. This, he held up another sheaf of papers, is a partial, but very incriminating, copy of the same bank statements Charlie just provided me. And this, he held up a small silver USB drive, identical to the one in my pocket. Appears to be a backup. She sent me an insurance policy. Vanessa Monroe looked at the papers. She looked at me. She looked at my father. And the mask of the grieving daughter-in-law, the competent wife, the lady of the manor, didn't just crack. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. She lunged, not at Harrington, at me. You, she screamed, her voice a raw animal sound I had never heard before. You did this. You poisoned her against me. You little bitch. My father, in a single, uncharacteristic act of self-preservation, grabbed her arm as she flew across the coffee table. Vanessa, stop it! Stop it! You're making it worse! She was a cornered animal. It's mine. That house is mine. I earned it. I spent 16 years with that miserable old woman. I earned it. Vanessa, Harrington said, his voice cutting through her screams like a scalpel. The distribution of all assets is hereby frozen. I am legally obligated to petition the probate court for a full audit of the estate, dating back 3 years. Given this evidence, and the matching evidence provided by Mrs. Hale herself, the court will almost certainly open an investigation into felony elder abuse. Eric collapsed. He didn't just sit. He fell back onto the sofa as if his bones had dissolved, his face white, his hands shaking. Felony? Howard? Oh my God. Oh my God. Vanessa, what did you do? Aunt Clara and Cousin Gary were on their feet, backing away toward the door, whispering, horrified, as if Vanessa were suddenly contagious. She stood in the middle of the room, trapped, exposed, vibrating with a rage so pure it was terrifying. She looked at me, her face contorted. I just sat there. I didn't move. My hand, the one in my pocket, closed around the small, cold flash drive. The other hand went to my neck, to the tiny key hidden under my shirt. The battle was over. The war had just begun. I'm here, Grandma. I thought, as Vanessa's screams turned to strangled, desperate sobs. I'm here, and I will see this through. The 2 weeks that followed were an education in the anatomy of a crime. The chaos of that night, Vanessa's screams, my father's total collapse, the hurried, horrified exit of my aunt and cousin, congealed into a cold, quiet, procedural reality. The living room, once a stage for her performance, became a crime scene. I moved into Mr. Harrington's conference room. It became my new office, my war room. The space smelled of old leather, floor wax, and the sharp, clean scent of binder paper. We were joined by a woman named Ms. Davies, a forensic accountant Harrington had on retainer. She was a small, precise woman with sharp gray eyes and a silver pen that hovered over spreadsheets like a kestrel. I had walked her through the contents of the box. My hands were steady now. I was no longer a grieving granddaughter. I was a nurse presenting a patient's chart. I laid out the bank statements, the credit card receipts, the original, 10-year-old will, and the deed to the 22 acres of land. I told her about my weekly transfers, about the necessities Vanessa claimed she was buying. Ms. Davies listened without expression, her pen making tiny, neat notations. She was commingling funds, she said simply, and she was sloppy. She was the one who went deeper. The box was just the map. Ms. Davies acquired the subpoenas and followed the trail. She pulled Vanessa's own credit card statements, the ones linked to the joint account. She pulled the bank's security camera footage. She matched dates and times. Here, she said, tapping a spreadsheet on her laptop a few days later. A weekend at the Ocean View Retreat, $800, charged to your grandmother's account. The dates correspond to a weekend you told me you worked a double shift at the clinic. She said she was visiting a grief counselor, I whispered, the lie sounding so thin and absurd in this room. And here, she continued, her voice devoid of emotion, a charge at a designer boutique downtown, $1,200, for a handbag, and here, a series of charges at a spa, manicures, facials, massages, totaling over $3,000 in 6 months. It wasn't just theft, it was a victory dance. She had been spending my money and my grandmother's money to celebrate her own cleverness. But the real evidence, the piece that went beyond the numbers, was the USB drive. Harrington dimmed the lights in the conference room. My father was there, present at Harrington's insistence. He looked like he had aged 20 years. He was gray, shrunken, and his hands trembled. He sat in a chair in the corner, as far from the head of the table as possible. Harrington inserted the small, silver drive into his laptop. The projector whirred to life, and the wall lit up. My grandmother's face appeared. I had to choke back a sob. It wasn't the strong, vibrant woman from my childhood. This was the woman from the end. She was skeletal, propped up on her pillows, the familiar floral wallpaper of her bedroom behind her. She was wearing her favorite blue bed jacket. She must have set up her own laptop on a tray. She was looking directly into the camera. Her voice was weak, a dry rustle, but it was clear. I am recording this, she said, her eyes burning with a cold fire I hadn't seen in months. It is May 12th. Vanessa is in the kitchen. She thinks I'm sleeping. She took a rattling breath. She keeps bringing me papers, every day, new papers. She wants me to sign them. She says it's to simplify things, to make it easier for Eric. She brought a man here today, a notary. I told him I was too tired. My father made a small, strangled sound in the corner. She wants to sell the silver, Grandma's voice continued, a tear of pure, frustrated rage tracking down her papery cheek. She said we needed the money for my care. I know for a fact my care is paid for. I know what's in the accounts. She thinks I am a fool. She leaned closer to the camera, as if trying to push her will through the lens. She wants me to change the will, the one from April. She doesn't know about the first one. She doesn't know about the land. She's so busy, stealing the furniture. She hasn't bothered to look at the foundations. The video was a 20-minute testament. She detailed the pressure, the arguments, the way Vanessa would hold the phone up to her ear to help her talk to her banker. Then, she looked straight at the camera, and her gaze was so direct, it felt like she was in the room with us. "If you are watching this, Charlie," she whispered, and my name was a physical blow. "It means she has gone too far. It means she has hurt you. The way I knew she would. I am old. I am tired. I cannot fight her off forever. So I have left you the weapons. I am giving you my permission. You use everything in that box. You protect yourself. You protect what is ours. You be my steady hands." The video clicked off. The screen went blank. The silence in the conference room was absolute, broken only by the sound of my father, weeping, his face in his hands. Vanessa was summoned for a formal deposition a week later. She arrived dressed for war, in a severe charcoal suit and high heels that clicked like gunshots on the marble floor. She brought her own lawyer, a slick man who looked like he specialized in making problems disappear. She stuck to her story. They were gifts. Margaret insisted. I was her primary caregiver. She was grateful. She was generous. This, she gestured to me, is a fantasy, a child's tantrum, because she didn't get the allowance she wanted. Her lawyer smiled. This is a simple case of family misunderstanding, complicated by grief. Harrington didn't argue. He just dimmed the lights. "We'd like to play a short video for you, from Mrs. Hale, dated May 12th. I watched Vanessa's face as my grandmother's image filled the screen. The blood drained from her cheeks. Her composure didn't just crack, it evaporated. When Grandma's voice detailed the pressure to sell the silver, Vanessa's lawyer stopped smiling. When Grandma said, "She thinks I am a fool," he put his pen down. By the time the video ended, Vanessa was as gray as my father had been. Her lawyer was staring at the blank screen. His entire strategy, his entire case, gone. This is an invasion of privacy," Vanessa stammered, but the words had no force. "Is it your testimony?" Harrington asked, his voice quiet. "That the woman in this video is lying?" She had no answer. The video, combined with the bank statements, wasn't just incriminating, it was definitive. It was, as Harrington later told me, a prosecutor's dream. My father's collapse was total. He sat in my small apartment. I had moved out of the house, which was now a frozen asset, and into a temporary rental, surrounded by my few boxes. "I just signed," he whispered, staring at a wall. "She said it was for the insurance, for the hospital. I didn't read them. Oh, God. Charlie, I didn't want to fight. I didn't want her to be angry." He had been her willing, blind accomplice. His weakness, his terror of confrontation, had been the key she'd used to unlock everything. He finally looked at me, his eyes hollow. I will support you, in court, whatever you need. I'm so sorry." It was too late for apologies, but it was the first honest thing he had said to me in 16 years. He was, finally, on my side. Not that it mattered. He had no power left. The call came 3 days later, to my cell phone. From an unknown number, I answered it. "Charlie." My blood ran cold. It was her. "Don't hang up," Vanessa said, her voice rough, stripped of all its polite, brittle edges. "Listen to me. We don't need these lawyers. This is a family matter. Harrington is just trying to run up his bill. We have nothing to talk about, Vanessa." "Don't be a fool," she snapped, a flash of the old malice. She quickly reined it in. "Look, you're a nurse. You have a good heart. This is ugly. It's messy. Let's just be sensible. We split it, 50-50, down the middle, the house, the land, the cash. You call off Harrington. You tell him you found the gifts were valid. We split it. That's fair." I was silent. I stood by the window of my small, beige apartment, looking out at a brick wall. "Charlie, are you listening? It's a good offer. It's more than she ever would have left you." "No," I said. "What? What do you mean? No. Don't be stupid. You'll get half of everything. No questions. No taxes." "It was never about the money. Vanessa," I said. and my voice was as cold and steady as Ms. Davies's pen. "You don't get it, do you? You never have. This is about the bank statements. This is about the lies. This is about the video. And it's about the fact that you hit me." The line went dead silent. "You hit me," I repeated, my voice low and clear. In her kitchen, hours after her funeral, while my father watched. That's the part you can't buy your way out of. That's the part that costs you everything. I am not splitting anything with you. I am taking everything back, the way she wanted. I hung up the phone. Harrington laid out the final offer. It was, he called it, an off-ramp from a felony conviction. "The district attorney is very interested in the case of Hale versus Monroe," he explained, sitting across from Vanessa and her now very subdued lawyer. "Felony elder abuse carries a minimum sentence, or there is an alternative, a full and final settlement." He laid out the terms. Vanessa would repay, from her personal and retirement accounts, 80% of the misappropriated funds. The other 20%, Harrington said, was the cost of her education. She would sign a quitclaim deed on the Arbor Street house, relinquishing all interest, spousal or otherwise, effective immediately. She would sign away any and all claims to the 22 acres of land. She would sign away any claim to any account bearing Margaret Hale's name. In exchange, and only after the funds were transferred and the deeds were signed, I would inform the district attorney that I believed the civil settlement satisfied the debt, and that I did not wish to pursue criminal charges against her. Her lawyer looked at her. "Take the deal, Vanessa." She fought. She screamed. She cried. She accused Harrington of extortion and me of vindictive cruelty. She threatened to countersue. Harrington just sat there. When she was done, he said, "The DA's office is open until 5 p.m. Shall I make the call?" She was trapped. It was prison, or it was this. The final meeting was not a negotiation. It was a surrender. We sat at the long conference table again. My father was there, as a witness. Vanessa was there. I sat at the far end of the table, my hands folded, the silver key on its chain resting against my collarbone, outside my shirt. I did not speak. I just watched. Harrington pushed the first document toward her, the quitclaim deed, the paper that would remove her name from my grandmother's house forever. I watched her hand shake as she picked up the pen. I watched her sign her name. Her signature, once so bold and flowing, was tight and spidery, just like Grandma's had been. Next, the document relinquishing all claims on the land. She signed. Next, the agreement to liquidate her retirement account to make the repayment. She signed. Page after page, each stroke of the pen was a small, quiet death of the life she had built on my father's weakness and my grandmother's assets. She was signing away her future, her security, and her status. When it was done, she stood up. Her chair scraped loudly on the floor. She was pale, and her lipstick was smeared. She grabbed her empty designer handbag, the one, I noted, from the credit card statement, and slung it over her shoulder. Her lawyer was already packing his briefcase, eager to leave. She walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the brass handle. She turned back. She looked at me. Her face, stripped of all its masks, was terrifying. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. I had taken everything from her. But beneath the hatred, for the first time, I saw something else. I saw fear. She wasn't just angry. She was afraid. She was afraid of me. She said nothing. She turned, opened the door, and left. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving me, my father, and Mr. Harrington in the quiet, sterile room, with a stack of papers that had just rewritten my entire life. Walking out of Harrington's office a week later, I was, for the first time in my life, a wealthy woman. I was the sole legal owner of the Arbor Street house, the undisputed title holder to 22 acres of land, and the possessor of a cashier's check that represented the clawed-back entirety of Vanessa's theft. The paper felt heavy in my hands, a dense, legal shield. The war was over. The silence that followed was deafening. The news, of course, ripped through the family like a flash flood. The whispers, which had previously dismissed me, now took on a new, sharp tenor. Aunt Clara, the one who had watched Vanessa slap me and then stared at her shoes, had the audacity to send a comically large fruit basket to my rental apartment. My father's cousin, Gary, the one who had slurred about Vanessa's new will, called me, his voice thick with a new, oily respect, to offer my congratulations and to see if I was interested in any investment opportunities. I had been poor Charlie, the charity case, the freeloader. Now, overnight, I was Charlie Monroe, the heiress. Some were envious. Some called it justice. Some, I'm sure, called me a vindictive bitch. I didn't care. The paper had spoken. It had spoken louder than all of them combined. My first act was not one of liquidation. Vanessa, in her coarse, transactional view of the world, had seen the house as nothing but a dollar sign, an asset to be flipped. I saw it as an anchor. It was my fortress. It was my grandmother's last stand. I spent the money from the settlement to have the locks changed again. I moved back in, not as a guest, but as the mistress of the house, using a new, solid brass key. The house was still thick with the memory of her, but it was also choked with the ghost of Vanessa, her faint, chemical lavender perfume, the cold, sterile beige she had painted the living room, the hard modern furniture she'd used to replace my grandmother's comfortable, worn pieces. I spent the first weekend in a frenzy of exorcism. I opened every window in the house, letting the cold November air scrub the place raw. I hired painters to cover the beige in a warm, clean white. I donated Vanessa's ugly minimalist sofa to a shelter. I went to the attic and, with my father's help, I dragged my grandmother's enormous, overstuffed floral armchair back down to its rightful place by the fireplace. I was not just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming my memory, my childhood. The house was the past. The money was the restitution. But the land? The land was the future. The following Saturday, I drove out to see it. It was exactly where the deed described. 22 acres of forgotten, overgrown field on the county's east side. It was a care desert. The neighborhood was a patchwork of low-income housing and aging apartment buildings, miles from the nearest hospital, a place where a simple infection could become a life-threatening emergency. I knew this area. I had volunteered here in my first year of nursing school, working out of a rattling mobile van that offered free flu shots and checked blood pressures. I knew the people here. They were the ones who fell through the cracks. I stood on the hood of my rusted-out sedan, looking over the expanse of brown weeds and sagging barbed wire fences, and I heard her voice, not the weak, reedy voice from the video, but the strong, kitchen-table voice from my past. It was from years ago. I had come home from a clinical rotation, furious and crying, after watching a diabetic man lose his foot to an infection that could have been prevented with a $20 bottle of insulin he couldn't afford. It's not fair. I had wept into a dish towel while she baked. I wish I could just build my own place, a small clinic, somewhere cheap, somewhere people could just walk in and be seen before it's too late. I had laughed through the tears. We could call it the Margaret Hale Memorial Clinic. She had stopped kneading the dough and looked at me, her hands white with flour. That's not a joke, Charlie. That's a plan. Standing on the hood of my car, I realized it wasn't a forgotten dream. It was an instruction. The land wasn't just an asset she had hidden. It was the tool she had left me. I went back to Harrington's office the next Monday. He expected me to ask about selling. I don't want to sell the land, Howard, I said. He paused, looking over his glasses. It's a very valuable parcel. Charlie, the market is... I want to build on it. I met with two of my oldest colleagues from Lighthouse Springs, a charge nurse named Beth who had seen it all, and a physician's assistant named Ken who was tired of the hospital's bureaucracy. I laid out the new bank statements and the deed to the land. I bought them coffee in a diner. I have the land, and I have the seed money, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I want to open a nonprofit community care center for the uninsured, for the elderly on fixed incomes, basic primary care, wound management, vaccinations, diabetes education, a place to catch them before they fall. Beth's eyes filled with tears. Ken just nodded, a slow, deep smile spreading across his face. The Margaret Hale Community Care Center, he said, testing the name. It sounded like a fortress. The legal battle had been a brutal, short-lived war. The next 6 months were a different kind of fight. It was a long, grinding, uphill campaign. I was a nurse. I knew bodies. I knew medication. I knew nothing about zoning laws, nonprofit incorporation, liability insurance, or building codes. I wasn't just a grieving granddaughter anymore. I wasn't the bullied child. I was, suddenly, an executive director. I was a fundraiser. I was a project manager. I spent my days not at a nursing station, but in sterile government offices, filling out forms in triplicate. I learned to negotiate with contractors, to read blueprints, to fight with city councilmen over permits. Every time I hit a wall, every time a bureaucrat told me no, I would see Vanessa's face in my mind, the sneer she'd given me. A lowly job, a child, a parasite. This, I realized, was the true revenge. Not the victory in a lawyer's office, but the slow, agonizing, triumphant act of building. My father, Eric, he had moved out of the house the day I moved in. He found a small, bleak one-room apartment across town. Vanessa, I'd heard, had left him immediately, taking what little she had been allowed to keep and disappearing, presumably to her sisters. He called me once, twice, but I didn't answer. Then one day, he just showed up at the construction site. The foundation had just been poured. He was wearing old, cracked work boots and a tool belt I hadn't seen him wear since I was a child. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, watching the crew. He looked gray. He looked thin. I heard what you were doing, he said, his voice rough. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at the concrete. I said nothing. I was a carpenter. Once, he whispered. Before, I know how to frame a wall. I know how to hang drywall. If you'd let me, I could help. I don't want any money for it. He was offering me the only thing he had left, his hands. I looked at this man, this ghost, who had sat silent, who had closed his eyes when I was hit. The anger was still there, a cold, hard stone in my stomach. I would never forget that. But the burning, corrosive hate, it was just tired. I don't forgive you, I said, my voice flat, echoing in the open air. He flinched, but he nodded. I know. But I'm short-handed, and I can't afford to pay a framing crew what they're asking. You be here tomorrow, 6 a.m., and you don't be late. He finally looked at me, his eyes brimming with a desperate, terrible relief. I'll be here, he whispered. I'll be here at 5:45. He was the biggest discovery. The final piece of my grandmother's plan didn't come from the wooden box. It came from the county planning office. While I was fighting for a zoning variance, a tired clerk mentioned the property file was unusually thick. Someone wanted this land. Bad, he said, blowing dust off a thick file. He pulled out a correspondence folder. Inside was a series of letters, dated 2 years ago, from a high-powered real estate development firm. They had been trying to buy the land to build luxury condominiums. The final letter contained their offer. It was a high 7-figure sum, an astronomical amount of money that would have made my grandmother's final years unbelievably comfortable. And attached to it was her reply. It was a single, typewritten page, signed in her elegant but slightly shaky hand. This land is not for sale, she had written. It is not an asset for your firm to develop. I am holding it for my granddaughter, and I am holding it for the people who actually need this place. Your luxury condos are not needed here. My granddaughter's healing hands are, do not contact me again. I stood in the dusty, fluorescent-lit records room, my hands shaking as I held the letter. I had thought the land was just a secret, A way to keep money from Vanessa. I was wrong. It was the whole point. The house was the past. The money was the restitution. But the land was the future. She hadn't just been planning a legal revenge. She had been actively, brilliantly, engineering my destiny. She had given me the one thing Vanessa could never understand and could never take, a purpose. The work accelerated. My father, true to his word, showed up every single day. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave. He was quiet. He was meticulous. And he taught me how to frame a wall. He taught me how to measure, how to use a level. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about Vanessa. We just built. The brown, overgrown field became a skeleton of 2x4s. The skeleton became walls. The walls became rooms. A small, bright reception area. 3 exam rooms. A tiny office for counseling. A larger, open room for simple physical therapy and community classes. It wasn't a hospital. It wasn't fancy. But it was solid. It was real. I took the small, dark wooden box, the one from under my bed, and placed it on the single bookshelf in my new, tiny office. It wasn't a box of weapons anymore. It was a time capsule. It was a reminder that my grandmother had not just loved me, she had believed in me. The day before the soft opening, I was there alone. The contractors were gone. The smell of fresh paint, a calm, hopeful blue that Beth had chosen, was thick in the air. The new vinyl floors were clean and shining. I walked through the empty reception area, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. I stood in the middle of the main room, under the new, bright lights. I looked up at the clean, white ceiling, at the drywall my father had hung, the seams so perfect they were invisible. I closed my eyes, and I whispered to the empty, painted room, to the new, solid walls. Grandma, have I used what you left me just the way you hoped I would? The grand opening of the Margaret Hale Community Care Center was on a bright, cold Tuesday in March. The parking lot, still smelling of fresh asphalt, was full. I had expected maybe 30 people, a few colleagues, some local families. Instead, there were over 100. The small local news van was there, a reporter I recognized from the paper, even some of my distant relatives, including Aunt Clara, who watched me with a new, deeply respectful, and slightly terrified gaze. They were all here to see the miracle built on the inheritance. They loved the story now. The devoted granddaughter, wronged by the evil stepmother, who had used her grandmother's secret fortune to build a monument. They had, of course, forgotten their own silence, their own complicity, on the day of the funeral. My father, Eric, stood by the new glass doors, his suit a little too large for him now, looking proud and nervous, handing out pamphlets. He was my head of maintenance. I was shaking, my speech clutched in my hand, when I saw her. She was standing at the absolute edge of the crowd, half hidden by a large oak tree that bordered the property. It was Vanessa, but it wasn't. The designer clothes, the perfect blonde hair, the immaculate, cruel makeup, all of it was gone. The woman by the tree was wearing a simple cloth coat, her hair a flat, dull brown, her face pale and haggard. She looked 10 years older. She looked ordinary. She looked like the women this clinic was built to serve. Our eyes met across the parking lot. I saw a flash of something in her face. Shame, anger, desperation, before I deliberately turned away. I stepped up to the small podium. I pretended I hadn't seen her. I looked out at the crowd, at the new, clean building behind me. "Thank you all for coming," I started, my voice shaking just a little. I talked about the need. I talked about the community, and then I talked about Margaret. "This clinic is named for my grandmother," I said, my voice gaining strength, "because she taught me what it means to care for people. She taught me about steady hands. But more than that," I looked up, my gaze sweeping past the tree where I knew she was watching. "My grandmother taught me that true caregiving is not about possession, it's not about control, it's about service." I felt the words land. It was a small, precise incision. I picked up the comically large scissors, I cut the big red ribbon. The crowd applauded. The Margaret Hale Community Care Center was officially open. People flooded in, marveling at the clean floors and new equipment. I was shaking hands. Beth was organizing patient intake for the first time, and Ken was showing a family the counseling office. It was loud, happy, and overwhelming. I was heading toward my office when a voice, quiet and rough, stopped me. "Charlie." I turned. Vanessa was standing in the hallway, away from the crowd. My father was there a second later, his hand on my arm, his body instinctively moving between us. "Vanessa," he said, his voice a low warning. "You shouldn't be here." I need to speak to her," she said, and her eyes were fixed on me. "Please, 5 minutes, alone." My father looked at me, ready to call security. But I looked at this woman, this ghost, and I knew my grandmother's letter was right. This was part of the story, too. This was the last piece. "It's okay, Dad," I said. "I'll be fine. Let us use the small counseling room." He was hesitant, but he nodded, his eyes never leaving Vanessa as she followed me. I led her into the small, empty room with the bright blue walls. The smell of fresh paint and new carpet was thick. I closed the door, leaving it open just a crack. She stood in the middle of the room, her hands twisting the strap of a worn, non-designer handbag. She looked lost, a stranger in a place built from her ruin. She tried to muster her old arrogance. It was a pathetic, terrible thing to watch. "Well," she said, a bitter purse to her lips, "you've won. You got it all. The house, the money, this monument to how terrible I am. What more do you want?" She was trying to make it a game. She was trying to make it about money. "I never wanted to win, Vanessa," I said, my voice quiet. "I just wanted to not lose. I just wanted my grandmother to be respected. And I just wanted to not be assaulted in my own home, directly after her funeral." The word assaulted hung in the air. The slap. The one thing that had never been settled in a lawyer's office. Her brittle pride shattered. It was instant. Her face crumpled. I was so afraid," she whispered, the words tearing out of her. "My whole life, I was terrified of being poor, of being nothing, like my mother was. When your father, when he had nothing, I thought Margaret's house, her money, it was the only thing protecting me. It was my only way out. I had to have it." She was crying now, ugly, desperate tears. I never dreamed she had a second plan, a box, a video. I thought she was just a confused, stubborn old woman. I didn't know she was smarter than me. I watched her, and I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, just a vast, cold emptiness. I reached into the pocket of my blazer. I had put it there this morning, not knowing why. It was a folded, photocopied piece of paper, the last page of Margaret's letter. "She knew," I said. Vanessa looked up, her face blotchy. "What?" "She knew you. She saw you. She left this for me." I unfolded the paper. She wrote, "Vanessa is also a part of this story, but not the part you need to save." Vanessa flinched, as if I'd hit her. I kept reading. She is a deeply broken and greedy woman, but then she wrote this. I looked down at the last paragraph. She wrote, "Don't let yourself become like her, Charlie, but don't make her the monster in your story either. She is just a sad, hungry woman who lost her way." Vanessa made a sound, a choked, agonizing sob, and her hands flew to her mouth. She was weeping, not from her loss, but from this, the idea that Margaret hadn't hated her, but had pitied her. That was the final, devastating blow, to be seen, not as a villain, but as a sad, pathetic failure. "Please," she choked out. "Charlie, please, I have nothing. Your father, he left. I have no money. I have a room at my sister's. I can't find a job. No one will hire me." She looked around the small, new room. I can file. I can answer phones. I'm good at paperwork. I could work here, for minimum wage, for free, anything. Please, I need, I need a chance to start over. This was it, the great moral choice. The woman who had tried to destroy me, who had stolen from my grandmother and hit me in the face, was begging me for a job. The instruction from the letter rang in my ears. Don't make her the monster. I was silent for a long time. I thought about the slap. I thought about her hissing parasite at me. I can't trust you, I said finally, my voice flat. I will never trust you. Her face fell. But, I continued, my grandmother didn't want me to be a monster, either. And I believe in this clinic. I believe it's a place where people get the help they need. Even people like you. I looked her dead in the eye. I can't give you trust, but I can give you a chance to prove you are not the woman who hit me on the day of my grandmother's funeral. One chance. I thought she would just cry, or say thank you. I was wrong. She did not just cry. She collapsed. She fell to her knees on the new carpet, right in front of me. She knelt. I'm sorry, she wailed, and it was a sound from the depths of her soul. I am so sorry, Charlie, for the slap. I didn't mean, I was so angry. And you looked at me, and She was apologizing for the slap, not the money, not the will, the slap. I have a daughter, she whispered, her face buried in her hands on the floor. From my first marriage. She won't talk to me. I'm so afraid. I'm so afraid she'll see me. She'll see me as the monster. Please. She was kneeling at my feet, the once powerful, magnificent Vanessa, begging for absolution. I looked down at her. I did not reach out. I did not pull her up. I did not turn away. Get up, I said. She looked up, her face a ruin of tears and shame. Get up yourself, I said, my voice hard, but not unkind. If you want to be different, no one can pull you up but you. That was 6 months ago. Vanessa has been our receptionist 4 days a week. She is quiet. She is efficient. She is the first to arrive, and she leaves at 5 p.m. on the dot. She answers the phone. She files the charts, and she never, ever speaks to me unless it is about a patient. My father stocks the supply closet in the mornings. Before she arrives, they have not spoken a single word. Sometimes, I walk past the reception desk. I see the top of her dull brown hair as she works, and she will look up, and I will look at her, and we will nod. A short, sharp nod of acknowledgement. It is not forgiveness. It is not friendship. It is not family. It is an armistice. The war is over. The battlefield is quiet. Tonight, I am late leaving the clinic. It is almost 9 p.m. I drive home, not to my small beige rental, but to the house, my grandmother's house, my house. It is quiet. My father's armchair is in its place. The smell of Vanessa's lavender is long gone, replaced by the scent of lemon oil and old books. I walk up the stairs. I go into my room. The old floral wallpaper is gone, replaced by a soft, pale green. But the bed is the same, the heavy, solid maple bed. I don't even turn on the lamp. I lie down on top of the comforter, my shoes still on, and I stare up at the ceiling in the moonlight. I am 29 years old. I am a nurse. I am an executive director. And I am, finally, home. I touch the wooden bed frame. I think about the hollow space beneath it, now empty. I think about my grandmother's brilliant, patient, devastating plan. She had given me the truth as a weapon. She had given me the money as a tool, but she had given me the land as a purpose. Vanessa's revenge would have been to sell the house, take the money, and leave me with nothing. My grandmother's revenge was to let the greedy pay their price, and then to give me the power to build a life of decency. A life that mattered more than any of them could ever have imagined. The room is finally, truly mine. No secrets, no ghosts, no fear. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. So please drop a comment below and let's connect. Your thoughts mean everything. Please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you can, hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who need to hear it.